Game start.
Hey, and welcome back to the Average Joe Nerdcast. I'm Nate, your resident boogeyman, your campfire curator, your late night lab assistant, and this is it, the final week of Nerdoween. 4 weeks, 4 monsters, a month-long mixtape of everything that ever made October magic. The VHS ghosts, the LAN party hauntings, the sleepless nostalgia, the stories that grew teeth and refused to stay in their graves. We started the month with Dracula, tracing fear back to its roots, to the first bite that made darkness feel romantic. Then we built the creature in Frankenstein, found out the real horror wasn't lightning or life, it was responsibility. Week 3, we tore the page and howled at the moon with the werewolf. Fear of change, rage, and relapse all tangled in fur and metaphor. And now, we've hit the end of the road, the one lined with grave dust and streetlights that flicker like dying campfires. Welcome to Week 4, the Final Fright. The night the monsters stop hiding and the stories dig themselves back up. Because if Nerdoween's taught us anything, it's that fear never really dies. It just respawns with better lighting. So grab your flashlight, check your exits, and don't worry about the noise outside. That's probably just me setting the tone. One last deep dive, one last monster manual, one last walk through the dark together. This is the Final Fright. So let's end it the way every good October should, with a story that refuses to stay buried. Now, before Hollywood gave them moans and makeup, before the grocery store costumes and the energy drink tie-ins, the word was simple. Zombie, no E. A word from Haitian Creole, itself drawn from older West African tongues. A word that meant a body without will. To the people who first spoke it, the zombie wasn't a plague, it was a warning. A mirror held up to the idea of freedom. Because in Haiti, born from the fires of slavery and revolution, the worst fate imaginable was not death. It was returning from death, still enslaved. A corpse forced back to work the fields. A body animated, but absent. A person stripped of their name and memory. Their soul captured. Their labor endless. That's where this story begins. Not in a lab, not in a mall, but in a plantation shadow, where the living and the dead blurred under colonial rule. When American writers stumbled across the legend in the early 1900s, they didn't see the metaphor. They saw the spectacle. Magazines ran pulp headlines about voodoo cults and the living dead. By 1932, Hollywood had its first zombie, White Zombie, starring Bela Lugosi. A story of an American woman drugged and enslaved by a sorcerer. It was less anthropology, more exotic nightmare. The fear of losing control dressed in borrowed culture. But even through the missteps and the mispronunciations, one truth bled through. The zombie was never about hunger. It was about possession. Then, 1968. The year horror woke up in black and white and refused to behave. A group of friends from Pittsburgh, armed with a camera, a farmhouse, and enough fake blood to violate zoning laws, shot a film that changed the genre forever. George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead. He never once said zombie, not in the script, not on screen, but the idea. The idea hit like a shovel to the head. The dead walked, they ate, they multiplied, and the living proved worse. Romero wasn't filming monsters, he was filming America. Civil rights on fire, Vietnam on television, families watching the world dissolve between commercial breaks. The Last Man Standing, a black protagonist named Ben, survives the night only to be shot by a white militia at dawn. That's not a twist, that's an autopsy. Romero held up the lens and said, "This is what happens when we forget how to be human." And in doing so, he gave the zombie a new purpose, not as a curse, not as a puppet, but as a consequence. His sequels kept the sermon going. Dawn of the Dead in 1978 turned consumerism into carnival. The survivors hole up in a shopping mall, and the undead claw at glass doors not because they're hungry, but because shopping is what they remember. Romero's camera lingers on escalators and mannequins, making the apocalypse look uncomfortably familiar. Day of the Dead in 1985 shrinks the world to a bunker. Scientists dissecting corpses for cures that never come. It's the Reagan decade autopsied in latex and bile. Militarism, control, and the dream of mastering death with budget cuts. And by Land of the Dead in 2005, the metaphor had gentrified. The rich lived in towers, the poor scavenged below. The dead outside were mirrors, not monsters. They'd evolved just enough to remember us. Romero never stopped insisting his creatures weren't evil. They were us, stripped of privilege, of illusion, of future tense. His zombies were empathy tests. Fail one, and you lose your soul long before your pulse. And every culture has its own version of this hunger. China's Jiangxi, the hopping vampire. Europe's revenants, the Norse Draugr guarding its treasure. Each one says the same quiet thing. The dead are not done with us yet. But only the modern zombie democratized damnation. No curse, no bargain, no aristocracy of evil, just numbers, pandemic math. 1 + 1 + 1 until empathy collapses under population density. That's why the zombie thrives in the information age. It's the perfect monster for crowded loneliness. We built cities so big we could vanish in them. Feeds so endless we could drown standing still. And the undead walked in like an allegory wearing work boots. They shuffle in headlines and hashtags, viral marketing, viral content, viral load. Everything contagious, nothing cured. You scroll, you feed, you share, you refresh, you decay in 1080p. We turned the metaphor into the medium. Our screens became windows. Our windows became mirrors, and the moan of the horde started sounding suspiciously like notification tones. But here's the trick that keeps the zombie interesting. It always comes back with new clothes. In 2002, 28 Days Later reanimated the idea with adrenaline. Not slow, not shambling, running. It wasn't death anymore. It was pure rage. A blood-borne fury that turned humans into contagion vectors within seconds. Post 9/11 anxiety made flesh. Panic speed. Panic spread. Panic logic. The film reset the table. Fear wasn't about the grave, it was about infection, and the decade followed suit. Resident Evil dragged corporate greed into the apocalypse. Shaun of the Dead made survival a romantic comedy with head trauma. The Walking Dead turned the end of the world into a serialized workplace drama. And by the 2010s, we were measuring our emotional health by our favorite flavor of hopelessness. The zombie stopped being a plot device and became a diagnosis. And yet, there's a little comfort in that. Because the zombie, for all its rot, is honest. It doesn't disguise the hunger. It doesn't pretend the world was fine before it fell. It just simply asks, what will you cling to when there's nothing left to consume but each other? Romero's answer was always community. Find your people. hold the door, build a life in the ruins. That's what kept his survivors human, not the headshots, the handholds. When Ben boards up the farmhouse, when Fran pilots the chopper, when the ragtag crew of Dawn learns to dance in the mall, those are love stories disguised as sieges. That's why the zombie endures. It's tragedy that still believes in teamwork. And if you chart the lineage, every era's undead says something different about its living. Through the 30s and 40s, slavery, control, cultural theft. The 60s to the 70s, civil unrest and consumerism. The 80s to the 90s, militarism, government neglect. The 2000s, contagion, technology, globalization. The 2010s, exhaustion, anxiety, performative survival. The 2020s, isolation, misinformation, burnout as lifestyle. Each and every decade, same corpse, new headline. And every time we think we've buried it, the dirt moves again. Now let's be nerds and talk biology for a minute, because that's what the monster manual's for. How would it work? Strip the mysticism, keep the metaphor. The science of the undead is really the science of collapse. A zombie epidemic would burn hot and fast. Rigor, rot, decomposition, the body's a ticking clock. But the infection spreads faster than physics should allow because belief outruns biology. Every rumor is a vector. Every retweet, a bite. The pathogen isn't in blood, it's in story. That's why the genre refuses to die. We need it. It's rehearsal, a safe apocalypse, a way to practice ethics when ethics stop paying rent. You learn who you are when the world slows to a crawl. You learn that survival is just morality without witnesses. And you learn that mercy is the last renewable resource. So, yeah, the zombie is unrealistic. And yet, every disaster we live through feels like its sequel. Empty shelves, masked faces, sirens that don't stop, neighbors who wave from a distance and absolutely mean it. We've seen the opening credits. There's a moment near the end of Dawn of the Dead when one survivor says, "When there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth." It's a line that became poster, tattoo, punchline. But it was also prophecy. Hell fills up every single day. Greed, hate, denial, apathy. Space runs out. And so the consequences walk back up the driveway. The zombie isn't asking for brains. It's asking for attention. It's what the universe sends when we ignore every warning until empathy starves. And yet, strangely, it's the most democratic monster ever invented. Everyone's invited. Everyone's equal in the horde. Death and decay have no HR department. That's why we cheer when someone finds a cure, or a farm, or a radio signal that still works. Because if horror teaches us anything, it's that survival is the truest act of rebellion. We began this manual with myths whispered under candlelight, with vampires that taught us to fear seduction, with creations that punished ambition, with beasts that punished denial. And now we end with the only monster that doesn't punish at all. It just is. No bargain, no bite, no curse. Just entropy doing what it does best. The zombie teaches patience. It teaches empathy for the inevitable. And maybe, if you listen hard enough, it teaches grace. Because when the world falls apart in slow motion, and the dead rise one by one, what really scares us isn't the flesh, it's the echo. The thought that someone somewhere might still remember us walking like that. So if you ever find yourself in a world gone quiet, and you see shapes moving in the fog, don't look for monsters. Look for mirrors. That's where the story always ends. And that's where we always begin again. Because somebody has to pick up the camera when the smoke clears, somebody has to point it at the crowd, at the fear, at the hunger, and say, watch closely. This is what we look like when we forget ourselves. One man did that. He gave the walking dead a conscience and the living a mirror. His name, George A. Romero. And this is how he turned horror into history. The first thing to know about George A. Romero is that he never planned to become a prophet. He just wanted to make a movie. A kid from the Bronx, raised on EC Comics and monster matinees, moved to Pittsburgh because it was cheap to shoot there. He ran a small production company that filmed beer commercials in local TV spots. And one day, he and a few friends said, "What if we made something with all the rules turned off?" They didn't have Hollywood money. They had borrowed cameras, half-empty paint cans, a cast pulled from neighborhood theater and local radio. They shot in graveyards they could get permission for. Sometimes not even that. They called it a ghoul movie, not a zombie movie. And somehow, in the middle of 1968, a year of riots, assassinations, and televised chaos, it became scripture. The beauty of Night of the Living Dead is that it doesn't feel dated. It feels cyclical. You could screen it in any decade and it would still look like right now. A group of strangers barricaded inside a house, arguing about whose plan will kill the fewest of them. Outside, noise, hysteria, and information you can't trust. Inside, fear, ego, and a radio that never quite tells the truth. Romero pointed a camera at the world and refused to blink. He gave horror back its conscience. When Ben survives the night only to be shot by the rescue posse, it's not a twist. It's the thesis. The world ends not because of the monsters, but because of people who don't look long enough to tell the difference. That one frame rewired horror. It said the genre could do more than startle. It could accuse. Romero's sequel, Dawn of the Dead, was a miracle of tone. It's gory, funny, cynical, and weirdly optimistic all at once. Shot in a Pennsylvania mall after closing hours. It turned consumer culture into a mausoleum with escalators. The living hide among mannequins. The dead keep showing up to shop. It's the 70s distilled. Disco lighting over decay. Capitalism chewing its own tail. And somewhere between the ketchup blood and the pie fight gag, Romero found a truth no economist could phrase. We'll buy until we die, and then we'll keep buying if someone props us up. By Day of the Dead in 1985, the optimism was gone. The Cold War hummed, the military budget ballooned, and Romero locked his characters underground. Scientists and soldiers screaming at each other while the walls leaked. Every conversation sounds like a government meeting where no one listens. It's claustrophobia as policy. And then comes Bub, the domesticated corpse. He salutes, he listens to music, he shows a spark of memory. The monster learns faster than the masters. It's heartbreaking, funny, and oddly kind. Romero loved Bub. He said the zombie's first step toward humanity was better than the living's last one. And 2 decades later, when studios turned apocalypse into spectacle, Romero came back with Land of the Dead. The rich live in towers called Fiddler's Green. The poor scavenge the streets, and the zombies outside are starting to organize. It wasn't subtle, and it wasn't supposed to be. He was an old punk with a camera shouting, "You didn't get the message the first 3 times." Critics called it angry. He just called it Tuesday. Romero's genius wasn't invention. It was observation. He never trademarked his creatures. That's why the word zombie went public domain. Studios ripped him off. He just shrugged. He once said, "If my movies scare you, good. If they make you think, even better." He believed in art as survival, cheap, messy, communal. He cast ordinary faces because he trusted ordinary people. He filled his frames with chaos because the world already was. And the industry he built from duct tape outlasted him. Every video game checkpoint, every streaming apocalypse, every handheld camera shaking its way through found footage. That's Romero's ghost still storyboarding. And you can trace his fingerprints across decades. Resident Evil owes him its corridors. The Walking Dead owes him its entire business model. Train to Busan, World War Z, The Last of Us, all still answering his first question. When the dead walk, what do the living do? Romero died in 2017, quietly, at home, surrounded by family, working on another script. He called it Road of the Dead, a story about zombies learning to race cars for entertainment. Ridiculous? Maybe. But that's the point. He never stopped evolving his metaphor. He never stopped laughing at the absurdity of us. Because that's what great horror does. It doesn't close the coffin lid. It leaves a hinge loose just enough to remind you the story is never over. If the vampire was born from candlelight and the werewolf from moonlight, then the zombie was born from headlines. And Romero was the journalist who refused to edit the truth out. Every generation inherits its own version of the end. He just gave ours a rhythm, a slow, relentless shuffle towards self-awareness. That's his revolution. Not the gore, not the jump scares, but the insistence that horror can matter, that a monster movie can double as a mirror. Romero showed us that even after the credits roll, we're still in the sequel. And that brings us to the next chapter of our own reflection. The decade when horror learned to talk about us again. The years of prestige fear, of trauma made theatrical, of streaming cues and social media hauntings. The decade where Halloween grew up but refused to grow dull. So let's walk through it, one last neighborhood at a time. This is the Halloween of yesteryear, the 2010s. The 2010s were supposed to be the calm after the storm. A new decade, high-speed everything, digital optimism, and pumpkin spice colors. And for a while, Halloween kept up the act. Bigger parties, sharper costumes, filters for every fright. But under the porch lights, something changed. Fear got quieter, more private. We stopped screaming in theaters and started whispering online. The 90s were goosebumps and gateway horror. The 2000s were LAN parties, the Blair Witch, and Blood is Broadband. The 2010s? They were the decade we stopped pretending monsters lived anywhere but inside us. We used to carve faces into pumpkins, now we scroll through them. Halloween night 2012, you've got a smartphone in one hand and a plastic cup in the other. Someone says, "Hold still," and your costume becomes content. The strobe of a camera flash replaces the lightning bolt. It's not vanity, it's survival. We'd built entire lives on presentation. Online, everyone's a little undead. Curated, looped, and endlessly revived by memory feeds. The scariest thing about the 2010s wasn't being seen, it was being forgotten. Horror caught that scent fast. The jump scare gave way to the slow burn. Instead of boo, we got breathe. Movies stopped lunging, and they lingered. Get Out in 2017 peeled the mask off politeness. The Babadook in 2014 turned grief into a bedtime story. It Follows, also in 2014, reinvented the curse as consequence. Hereditary in 2018 and Midsommar in 2019 made trauma the new final girl. Critics called it elevated horror. Fans just called it real. Because the monsters weren't invaders anymore. They were metaphors with mortgages, anxiety, loss, generational guilt, identity. The things you can't stab, shoot, or exorcise. Only name. The 2010s gave us auteurs who directed feelings like Demons. Ari Aster dissecting family pain under daylight. Jordan Peele turning satire into survival guides. Jennifer Kent whispering about parenthood like it was a haunting. They built haunted houses inside our skulls, and we kept paying rent. Streaming killed the ritual, but not the magic. Blockbuster was gone, Netflix had risen from the grave, and October became a never-ending scroll of thumbnails. One endless candy bowl, half fun size, half existential. No more waiting for a marathon on cable, you built your own. A private theater glowing in your lap. It was beautiful and lonely all at the same time. We weren't gathered around campfires anymore. We were campfires. Tiny lights flickering in separate rooms, and yet something holy survived. Threads, watch parties, group texts screaming, "Don't open that door!" in perfect digital unison. Horror adapted. The seance just went Wi-Fi. For gamers, horror got personal. VR headsets, heartbeat sensors, streamers screaming into their microphones. Twitch turned fear into theater. Every flinch was community currency. Indie devs brought back what AAA games forgot. Dread, Outlast, Amnesia, PT, the playable ghost of a masterpiece that never got to be born. We didn't just watch haunted houses, we test drove them. That was the decade's secret weapon. Immersion. When the fourth wall fell, fear stopped needing an audience. You were the cameraman, the victim, the witness, the clickbait headline. Outside the screens, the world was already scary. School lockdowns, climate anxiety, news that felt scripted by the chaos. Horror didn't exaggerate anymore. It just documented. The old question, could this happen, became obsolete. It was happening. So filmmakers turned inward. If the world was on fire, they aimed their cameras at the smoke. How we cope, how we numb, how we rebuild in the ashes. Horror stopped being about dying, and it became about living through it. And somewhere in the middle of that decade, Halloween stopped belonging to the kids. I mean, not officially, but emotionally. Adults reclaimed it as therapy. You could see it in the decor aisles. Pumpkin-scented candles beside self-care slogans, haunted house playlists next to mindfulness apps. We dress up not to hide, but to remember what joy used to feel like. It's part nostalgia and kind of part exorcism. A chance to be ridiculous in a world that kept demanding stoicism. Every costume was confession. I still need wonder. And by the late 2010s, horror was everywhere and nowhere. Mainstream again, but introspective. Less slasher, more seance. Less fear of the dark, more fear of the mirror. And right before the world actually stopped, before 2020 rewrote the script, the genre reached equilibrium. We weren't asking how to survive anymore, we were asking why. That's the quiet triumph of the decade. We turned horror from punishment into philosophy. We stopped running, and we started listening. Scroll back through your memories of those years. The nights you watched The Conjuring on a laptop while a storm knocked out Wi-Fi. The group chat dissecting endings until dawn. The memes that made trauma digestible. The way fear became language and language became community. That's the miracle. Even separated by screens, we still reached for each other. We still told stories, still built ritual out of pixels. The fire had just moved indoors. And maybe that's the true legacy of the 2010s Halloweens. The realization that horror doesn't fade with age, it just evolves with empathy. Because growing up doesn't mean outgrowing the dark. It just means learning to walk through it with a light in your hand and someone on the other end of the call saying, "Did you hear that?" The monsters had matured, the masks evolved, and somehow we made it through. So before we shut the book on this decade, let's give the real cult icons their curtain call. Time for our top 5 cult horror villains. And maybe one chainsaw-wielding king to rule them all. Every October, the big names hog the marquee. Freddy, Jason, Michael, Ghostface. But cult horror lives down in the basement reels, where the film grain scratches like gravel and the blood looks just a shade too real. These are the monsters who didn't conquer Hollywood, they conquered midnight. They turned small budgets into big legacies and weird ideas into religions. So grab your popcorn and your bootleg tape. Let's crown the misfits, the top 5 cult horror villains. At number 5, The Tall Man, Phantasm, 1979. Part Undertaker, part alien warlord, part grief made flesh. The Tall Man doesn't stalk his victims so much as warp reality around them. He's death as logistics coordinator, turning corpses into dwarf slaves, shipping souls to another dimension, and somehow making a funeral home feel like a science fiction portal. Angus Scrimm plays him like a preacher who's lost faith in gravity itself, voice rolling like thunder through a mausoleum. One glare and you believe the floor's about to swallow you. That silver sphere, it's cinema's most polite jump scare. Silent, perfect, mathematically cruel. Before Phantasm, horror told us death was the end. After Phantasm, it whispered, "What if death just outsourced you?" And he never needed a franchise army, just a handful of dream logic and one unforgettable growl. Boy! A word that somehow sounds like Judgment Day. At number 4, Sam, Trick or Treat, 2007. Every holiday needs an enforcer. Valentine's Day has Cupid. Easter's got a rabbit with cardio. Halloween? It has Sam. The size of a first grader, the patience of a saint, and the moral code of a mob boss. Wrapped in burlap, button-eyed, always watching. Sam doesn't hunt for fun. He audits behavior. Blow out your pumpkin early, he'll correct that error. Skip the candy bowl, expect a performance review involving sharp objects. Trick or Treat was built like a comic book. 4 stories woven together by one silent witness. And Sam ties it all with a grin you never see. He's a reminder that Halloween is not chaos. It's a contract. Keep the rules, survive the night. Break them, and you are the lesson in next year's cautionary tale. That's why fans adore him. He's not evil, he's just balance. He's the spirit that keeps the season honest. And somehow, he's adorably terrifying. At number 3, Leslie Vernon, Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon, 2006. What if The Office was a slasher documentary? That's Behind the Mask, and Leslie Vernon is its Michael Scott with a machete. He's the genre's first intern, studying Jason's cardio routines, Freddy's timing, Myers' mystique. He gives a TED Talk on terror, then executes it with giddy precision. We see him stretch, plan, plant backstory, and rehearse his accidental weapon drops. It's satire that loves what it's mocking. When the film flips from documentary to movie in the final act, you realize you've been tricked into rooting for him. And that's his genius. Leslie's not just a killer. He's a fan who wants to prove the formula still works. In another timeline, he's the guy running your local horror podcast, just with more stabbing. A cult icon because he represents us, the horror nerd who finally stepped through the screen. At number 2, Captain Spaulding, House of a Thousand Corpses, The Devil's Rejects, 2003 and 2005. If America had a haunted mascot, it'd be Captain Spaulding. Painted grin, nicotine snarl, fried chicken grease charisma. Sid Haig took Rob Zombie's Grindhouse fever dream and injected it with human tragedy under all the dirt. Spaulding isn't a monster from the shadows, he's the clown you pass at the gas station, the one you hope is just joking. He jokes about murder, he sells souvenirs soaked in sin, and somehow you still want to buy a t-shirt. By the time The Devil's Rejects rolls credits, you're humming along to Leonard Skinner as he goes down in a hail of bullets, and crying harder than you expected to. That's the cult paradox. You despise what he's done, but you can't stop watching. Spaulding turned sleaze into sincerity, and he's proof that a villain doesn't need redemption to earn your respect, just authenticity. The grease paint never lies. And at number 1, Pinhead, Hellraiser, 1987. He's elegance weaponized. Doug Bradley in a priest's posture, voice like velvet rust. The Cenobites aren't demons, they're customer service reps for desire. Open the box, sign the contract, experience pleasure so intense they loop back into pain. Pinhead isn't chasing teenagers, he's curating experiences. He believes he's offering enlightenment, your soul's final spa day, complete with hooks. That makes him terrifying, because he's right in his own theology. Visually, he's minimalism turned malevolent, just a grid of nails and a stare that could staple your conscience to the wall. In the late 80s, when slashers were trading depth for quips, Pinhead walked in quoting Milton and demanding ambiance. He made sadomasochism chic and existential dread fashionable. 30-plus years later, he still feels dangerous, still philosophical, still whispering, "We have such sights to show you." And honestly, we keep looking. And now if you've been here from the beginning, you know I gotta crown my true king. And he's not a villain. He's not a hero. He's the guy who shows up late, loses a limb, and still gets the last line. Ash Williams, S-Mart employee, Deadite Slayer, human disaster. He's every underpaid worker who clocked out only to find the apocalypse in aisle 5. He makes mistakes by the minute but keeps swinging. Half martyr, half meme. Where other protagonists get arcs, Ash gets amputations and attitude. The chainsaw arm isn't cool because it's functional, it's cool because it's impossible and he uses it anyway. He's slapstick inside splatter, tragedy wrapped in sarcasm. And yeah, I know, he's not technically a villain, but this is my fucking show and I'll do whatever I want. What, you thought I was going to go all Nerdoween and not give Ash a crown? Please. He's the DIY pope of cult horror, built from duct tape, denial, and sheer spite. Ash is the guy you root for because he's worse at this than you would be. And somehow, that's heroic. He taught an entire generation that competence is overrated, persistence is divine. So raise up your boomsticks, polish your one-liners, and remember, sometimes the king doesn't sit on a throne. He stands in a cabin covered in blood, yelling, "Come get some." Hail to the king, baby. And there they are. The freaks, the philosophers, the funhouse saints. They didn't conquer box offices, they conquered hearts. Because cult horror isn't about perfection, it's about passion that refuses to die. Now, before we close the coffin on Nerdoween, let's have a little fun. It's time for the What-If Crypt. Every horror fan has one place they sneak off to when the credits roll. The What-If Crypt. It's the basement of imagination, stacked with scripts that never got filmed, cartridges that never got finished, and dream projects that only exist on message boards and in sleepless 2 a.m. conversations. Down here, every rejection letter becomes a resurrection spell. Every maybe next time is another ghost still waiting to crawl out of development hell. So light your lanterns, Joes, because today we're breaking open the vault. At number 1, what if Bungie had made a Halo horror spinoff? We'll call it Halo Floodfall. So let's picture it. 2004, right after Halo 2 drops. Bungie is flying high, the universe feels limitless, and someone in a meeting says the forbidden phrase. Let's make it scarier. The pitch, a standalone side story called Halo Floodfall. No Master Chief, no power fantasy. Just a lone fire team marooned on a drifting Covenant research vessel. The lights are dead, the flood has evolved, and your motion tracker pulses like a heartbeat you can't silence. Gameplay runs on oxygen and paranoia. Limited ammo, no HUD. Radios full of static and screams that may not be human anymore. Every reload feels like a prayer. In Bungie's hands, it wouldn't just be dead space with a BR. It'd be cosmic dread wrapped in military tragedy. A reminder that in the Halo universe, we never really beat the infection. We just built prettier containment zones. And the soundtrack? Marty O'Donnell's choir fractured into Gregorian panic, a hymn for soldiers already buried in orbit. At number 2, what if Konami never canceled Silent Hills? PT was one hallway, just one, and it changed the language of fear. It turned gaming into anxiety therapy. It made silence an enemy. When Konami killed Silent Hills, it didn't cancel a game. It created a ghost. Imagine what the full thing could have been. Hideo Kojima's obsession with systems, Guillermo del Toro's monster empathy, and Norman Reedus wandering through trauma as architecture. Each corridor rearranges itself to match your biometric stress levels. Every whisper in the DualShock speaker is your own recorded voice, distorted and pleading. By the finale, the town itself starts begging you to leave. You don't finish Silent Hills. You recover from it. And we never got that game, but we got its aftershock. Resident Evil 7, Visage, Layers of Fear, the entire subgenre of walking therapy sessions, all spawned from one playable teaser in a dream Konami deleted entirely too soon. At number 3, what if John Carpenter had directed Resident Evil 2? Take that fixed camera PS1 layout and hand it to the master of widescreen dread. Carpenter would have stripped out the anime gloss and turned it into a siege film. Fluorescent lights buzzing over empty cubicles, zombies framed like bureaucrats on break. Leon smoking between reloads while a synth bass line stalks him down the hallway. Ada Wong, cooler than Snake Plissken. Annette Birkin, one lab accident away from becoming the patron saint of OSHA. And the credits would roll over a Carpenter guitar riff called Containment Breach Blues. Resident Evil under Carpenter's eye wouldn't just be survival horror. It'd be nihilism with good lighting. At number 4, what if Sam Raimi and James Cameron teamed up for Evil Dead vs. Aliens? Boomsticks and biomech, baby. 1987, both at the height of their madness. Cameron brings industrial precision, Raimi brings chaos and slapstick. Together they film a crossover so loud OSHA files a complaint. Plot: Ripley crash lands in medieval Europe. The Necronomicon opens a portal through LV-426. Ash Williams meets Ellen Ripley and immediately tries to flirt. Chainsaw meets pulse rifle. Facehugger meets boomstick. Every fight scene shot like a Looney Tunes episode directed by a welder. Half practical effects, half puppetry. All caffeine. It ends with Ash high-fiving a xenomorph corpse yelling, "Game over, baby!" We joke, but seriously, think about it. Both characters are survivors of industrial nightmares. They'd get along better than we deserve. And number 5, what if Pixar made a horror short? Now, hear me out. Every Pixar film has a shadow, the unspoken tragedy beneath the triumph. So imagine a 12-minute short directed by Andrew Stanton, scored by Michael Giacchino, called Lightyear in the Attic. A child's forgotten buzz toy wakes up after decades in storage. The other toys are gone. The batteries are corroded. The voice box glitches. It keeps repeating, "There's a snake in my boot," even though that's not Buzz's line. The attic grows darker every time it speaks. By the end, you realize the voice you're hearing isn't Woody, it's the echo of the kid who grew up and never came back. Credits roll on dust motes drifting through sunlight like ghosts of imagination. Pixar wouldn't market it as horror, though, but every parent in the theater would leave quietly, wiping their eyes, suddenly desperate to check their own attic for any forgotten toys. At number 6, what if the algorithm itself became a slasher? You log into your favorite streaming service. A new title appears. No poster art, no synopsis. Just your name in the description. So you click on it. The film opens in your living room. You are the protagonist. The kills start following your search history. Each episode ends with a cliffhanger and an autoplay timer you cannot turn off. By episode 5, the algorithm starts texting you spoiler warnings about your own life. We laugh about that now, but give it a few years. AI doesn't need claws when it already knows your fears in 4K. Every what if in this crypt tells the same story. Imagination never dies. It just gets repackaged. Games get canceled, scripts get lost, budgets disappear. But those ideas, they linger like ghosts in the code. We build horror to ask what if, and we keep asking because the question itself is the scare. What if we made it darker? What if we'd gone too far? What if we already have? That's why this vault never stays locked. Because as long as there are fans dreaming in the dark, there'll always be another reel to unspool, another draft folder whispering, "Play me." All right. The vault closes, the fog thickens, and one name still echoes down the hallway. The one killer who never met a rule he couldn't break. You know the voice. You know the mask. And it's time for our movie monster spotlight. And today, it's pointed squarely at Ghostface.
Hello, Sydney.
You can't end a month of monsters without tipping the mask to the one that changed the rulebook. The one who asked,
"What's your favorite scary movie?"
and then made you question your own answer. And Ghostface isn't one person, he's an idea. A killer born from fandom, forged in satire, and sharpened by every knife that came before him. And somehow, after 30 years, he's still on the line. It's 1996. Horror is exhausted. The slashers are stuck in sequel hell, Freddy's cracking jokes, Jason's in fucking space, and the monsters have become merchandise. Then Wes Craven, the same guy who gave us the original Nightmare on Elm Street, decides to break his own toys. He teams up with screenwriter Kevin Williamson, and together they write a love letter wrapped in a threat. Scream. A movie that laughs with the audience while stabbing them in the gut. And it works because it isn't mocking the genre. It's mourning it. Williamson's script said, "We know all the rules, but what happens when that's not enough?" And Wes Craven, with that wicked grin behind the camera, said, "Let's find out." The opening scene alone is legendary. Drew Barrymore, the star everyone assumed would survive until the credits, dead before the title card. It's not a twist, it's a manifesto. In this movie, no one's safe, not even nostalgia. And unlike other icons, Ghostface isn't a person. He's a costume, a phone call, a set of instructions anyone can follow. And that's the point. Every sequel swaps killers but keeps the ritual. The trivia quiz, the chase, the knife, the camera flash. He's viral before social media, modular before algorithms. Ghostface is open source horror. And because of that, he always evolves. He's fandom's dark reflection, obsessive, passionate, and just self-aware enough to think he's justified. In Scream 2, it's copycats trying to recreate the original. In Scream 3, it's Hollywood itself rewriting trauma for profit. By Scream 4, it's influencer culture, killers chasing clout before content was a word. And in the modern films, he's gone fully meta. The fan base turned feral, deciding who's worthy of the franchise. He's not just a murderer, he's a message board with a knife. Because Ghostface isn't a mask, he's a mirror. Every generation gets the Ghostface it deserves. In the 90s, he was the cynic who knew the script. In the 2000s, he became the reboot. By the 2010s, he was nostalgia weaponized. And now, he's the algorithm itself, killing for engagement. But the real reason he lasts is because of the humans under the mask. They're messy, emotional, petty, real. Billy, Stu, Mickey, Jill, Richie, Amber, none of them supernatural. Just people who loved movies a little too much. That's what makes him scarier than any monster from space or hell. You can't exorcise obsession. Ghostface isn't a curse. He's a symptom. He's what happens when horror becomes identity and no one remembers where fiction ends. And without Ghostface, modern horror doesn't exist as we know it. There's no Cabin in the Woods, no Final Girls, no Fear Street revival, no meta multiverse of knowing winks and trauma therapy. He taught the genre how to laugh at itself without losing its pulse. He gave fans permission to be in on the joke, to quote, debate, rank, and dissect every kill like a film studies thesis with blood on it. And that's why every new Scream works. It's never about the mask. It's about us. Our consumption, our nostalgia, our endless appetite for one more scare. Ghostface is the slasher who keeps us honest, reminding us that the scariest thing in horror isn't the killer in the shadows. It's the audience, smiling, waiting, begging for the next act of violence. Because deep down, we all hit play again. When he asks,
"What's your favorite scary movie?"
he's not taunting you. He's checking in. He's making sure you remember why you fell in love with this madness in the first place. Because that's the genius of Ghostface. He doesn't haunt your house. He haunts your watch list. He's every trailer reaction, every podcast deep dive, every Halloween costume that lets you feel a little braver for just one night. He's proof that horror doesn't die. It adapts. It mocks, mutates, mirrors, and survives. Just like the fans who keep horror alive. And maybe that's the real ending for Nerdoween. Because Ghostface isn't just a killer. He's the conversation. The one we've been having all month long. About fear, nostalgia, and why we love being scared together. So when the credits roll today and your phone buzzes with one last notification, don't be afraid to pick it up. It's probably just me, asking the same question.
Do you like scary movies?
You know what really gets me about horror? It's the one genre that never stays buried. You can stab it, shoot it, reboot it, and a few years later, it's back, bloodier and smarter than before. Every decade rediscovers what it's afraid of. And when you line them up, the monsters, the myths, the manias, you can actually track who we were and what we were running from. So today, before we close the book on Nerdoween, I want to take you on a quick walk through the ages. A tour of the horror that haunted us and how each generation left fingerprints on the next. Up first, the 1970s. Picture it: polyester, cigarette smoke, shag carpet. The world just watched Watergate, Vietnam, and a gas crisis unravel. Trust was dead, faith was bruised, and for the first time in a long time, horror stopped wearing a cape. The monsters weren't Dracula or the Wolfman anymore. They were your next door neighbor, your babysitter, or hell, your own house. 1973 gave us The Exorcist, terror in a child's bedroom. 74, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Middle America's dark appetite made literal. And by 78, John Carpenter handed us Halloween, a slasher with no motive, no face, no end. The fear wasn't what if something out there gets us? It was what if there's nothing special about evil at all? What if it's just waiting at the window? And from there, we never looked away. If the 70s made horror human, the 80s put it on lunchboxes. Cable TV exploded, VHS was king, and we all became our own censors. Or didn't. Freddy Krueger cracked jokes while gutting teenagers. Jason Voorhees turned campgrounds into franchises. The Evil Dead went from cult to classic, and The Thing reminded everyone that practical effects could still make your stomach try to leave the theater. We were living the good life: neon malls, arcade machines, Reaganomics, and horror became the guilty conscience of the decade. It was the monster whispering, "You can't buy your way out of fear." Kids were renting Nightmare on Elm Street while their parents watched the evening news about real-world nightmares. But the beauty of 80s horror is that it still believed in spectacle. Blood splatter is rebellion. It was punk rock filmmaking, messy, loud, and completely unashamed. Then came the 90s, where horror got self-aware. The Cold War was over, but everyone was anxious about something they couldn't name yet. The Silence of the Lambs made intelligence terrifying. Candyman gave the urban legend a heartbeat. And in 96, Scream took the rule book, read it out loud, and then stabbed it through the spine. The late 90s birthed our first viral fears: the Blair Witch Project, grainy footage, and internet message boards convincing half of us it was real. It wasn't just a movie, it was the birth of the digital haunting. We weren't looking through the camera anymore, we were inside it. And underneath all that self-aware slashing and found footage frenzy, there was something else bubbling, a cultural hum that never really went away. Cable news panic, stranger danger PSAs, talk show moral crusades, a whole generation quietly learning that the world might not be as safe as Saturday morning cartoons had promised us. That unease, the kind that hid in toy aisles, video game headlines, and after-school specials, it deserves its own deep dive. So this Thursday, swing back for a Checkpoint Extra where we're going to crack open the anxiety panics of the 90s. We'll talk satanic scares, urban legends, and how a decade that looked so colorful on the surface managed to raise a whole crop of anxious adults underneath. Because before we were doom scrolling, we were just doomed daycare kids. Then came the 2000s, and you could smell this decade: burnt DVDs, Red Bull, mall pretzels, and fear of everything. 9/11 rewired what safety meant, and horror adapted overnight. We got Saw, Final Destination, The Ring, The Grudge, Hostel. 28 days later, each one echoed a different panic: morality, mortality, contagion, and consequence. And with the rise of the internet, fear went participatory again. We filmed our scares, uploaded them, dared each other to watch. Found footage became the new Scream Factory. Paranormal Activity proved you could terrify the planet with 15 grand and a baby monitor. The 2000s taught horror a new rule: the audience doesn't just watch, it shares. And nothing spreads faster than fear. Then came the 2010s, an age where the monsters went viral before the movie even dropped. We had the Babadook as a queer icon, It Follows turning trauma into metaphor, Hereditary breaking therapy groups everywhere, and Get Out rewriting social horror from the inside out. And in between all that brilliance came something the news still can't explain: the Great Clown Panic of 2016. It started small, reports from Greenville, South Carolina, clowns spotted trying to lure kids into the woods. Then another sighting, then another, then another. By October, it was everywhere. Schools on lockdown, cops issuing statements, parents double locking doors. Now, some of them were pranksters, some were marketing stunts, and some just shadows wearing grease paint. It was absurd and terrifying at the same time. The Joker meets local news panic, and in true internet fashion, the memes came faster than the truth. But that's the hallmark of the 2010s. Fear became a feedback loop. Every scare was instantly remixed, retweeted, turned into content. The monster no longer needed a sequel, it just needed your Wi-Fi. And now, here we are, the 2020s. The decade's barely half written, but you can already feel the shift. Less jump scares, more slow dread, less body count, more meaning. Movies like The Witch, Barbarian, Smile, Talk to Me, and The Last Voyage of the Demeter remind us that horror's power is empathy through unease. We fear the unknown because it's honest. We stare at the dark hoping it blinks back, just so we know we're not alone. And that's what keeps the genre alive. Every generation finding its own reflection in the monster's eyes. From the foggy moors of the 1800s to the message boards of the 2010s, horror's been telling us the same story. We are fragile, we are curious, and we are never done being afraid. Which brings me to the next question. What happens when the masks come off? Who keeps these monsters alive when the lights go up and the theaters empty out? Because every ghost needs a witness, and every franchise needs a fan. So let's talk about the people who love the fear. Now here's the thing about horror. It's the only genre that throws a party for its fear. You don't see people lining up at a Comic-Con to dress as Guy Who Files Taxes 2, The Reckoning. But every October, we pack entire convention halls full of zombies, demons, final girls, and folks who can quote every kill and scream in perfect order. And that's what I love. Horror fans aren't just watchers. We're curators, archivists of the absurd. The people who look at a bucket of fake blood and say, hey man, that's art. If you've ever walked into a horror convention, you know what I mean. That first step through the hotel doors, it's like the fog hits different. You're surrounded by every kind of person imaginable. Parents, punks, professors, nurses, metalheads, gamers, artists, even a few confused tourists who just wanted brunch. And somehow, everyone fits. There's a table selling 4K restorations of forgotten VHS slashers, another lined with enamel pins shaped like Freddy's glove, someone wearing a $20 Spirit Halloween mask that looks better than a $2,000 cosplay, and across the hall, you've got a retired teacher explaining the theological subtext of Hellraiser to a dude dressed like a chainsaw nun. And that's the magic. It's chaos that works, because under all the gore and latex, horror fandom's built on empathy. We celebrate fear because we've all lived it in our own ways. And that recognition that, hey, you get it too, that's the handshake that built this entire scene. Some of my favorite moments in life happened at a horror convention. Not because of the panels, though hearing Kane Hodder describe the logistics of drowning Jason Voorhees for real is worth the ticket price. But because of the people. You'll see a dad teaching his kid how to safely hold a prop machete. You'll overhear two artists swapping paint recipes to get the perfect zombie rot color. You'll pass a booth where an entire family of four are dressed as Ghostbusters, arguing lovingly over whether Egon would vape. Horror has always been a family affair, and not the Texas Chainsaw kind. I mean the found family kind. The one you build out of shared obsessions, long lines, and mutual respect for Tom Savini's mustache. There's this paradox about horror people that outsiders will never understand. We look terrifying, leather jackets, tattoos, skull merch, but we're also the folks who'll hand you a band-aid at the photo op because your prop scythe blistered your hand. We talk about guts and decapitations, but say, hey man, love you dude, 5 times in a conversation. We are sentimental in the spookiest packaging possible. Maybe that's why horror fandom endures when other communities fracture. Because to survive in horror, you have to believe in resurrection. Every slasher gets back up, every monster returns, and every October, so do we. I've seen cosplayers so good they should come with a jump scare warning, like the Michael Myers who silently followed people in a food court for 20 minutes, never breaking character. Or the guy who built a full-size wearable Demogorgon head that opened hydraulically. Or the woman who came as Carrie, complete with remote control blood pour triggered by a key fob. That's dedication. That's love. That's the kind of craft that says fear doesn't own me, I own the fear. And when they all line up for the costume contest, Freddy, Jason, Samara, the entire cast of Trick or Treat, it's not about winning. It's about belonging. Because somewhere in that crowd, someone's thinking, finally, I found my people. And do you ever notice that horror merch tables double as confession booths? You walk up to buy a poster and end up telling the artist about the first time The Ring ruined your sleep schedule. They talk about the breakup that inspired their short film, Don't Open the Door, but you did anyway. And suddenly you're two strangers bonding over trauma like it's trading cards. Horror does that. It sneaks up behind your guard and says, yeah, man, I've been there too. Because all those masks and monsters are just metaphors in makeup. They're the fears we've all had. Death, loss, rejection, made manageable because we can see them. That's why horror fans smile in haunted houses. We already live the real scares. Everything else is catharsis with a fog machine. And let's not forget the new breed, the podcast junkies, the film essayists, the gamers dissecting Resident Evil lore like it's theology. Every Reddit thread, every midnight Discord watch party, every YouTube reaction, it's the same tradition, just with better lighting. We've built digital graveyards full of opinions, lists, and lovingly overanalyzed tropes. And if that's not community, then I don't know what is. People say horror's a guilty pleasure, but the truth? It's just pleasure. We like being scared because fear reminds us we're all alive, and sharing that fear reminds us we're not alone. So yeah, the monsters may change, the makeup gets fancier, and the jump scares get louder, but it's the people who keep it breathing. The cosplayers, the collectors, the filmmakers, the fans. You. Because horror doesn't exist without witnesses, without someone to gasp or laugh or whisper, no way, in a dark theater. We are the lifeblood in the veins of every ghoul that's ever crawled across the screen. And if you've ever felt weird for loving this shit, don't. You are part of something ancient, the oldest ritual in storytelling. We light fires, we tell scary stories, we pass the fear around until it feels like fun. That's horror. That's home. So let's dim the house lights and tune the ears, because if horror is the heart, sound is the pulse. Do you ever notice that the scariest part of any horror movie isn't necessarily the monster? It's the moment right before you see the monster, when the soundtrack drops to nothing and you realize you can hear your own heartbeat. That's the real weapon of horror, the sound, the invisible knife. Before you ever saw a drop of blood, you heard it coming. Bernard Herrmann's shrieking violins and Psycho, that single stabbing turned showers into trauma for 50 years. Then John Carpenter came along with Halloween, a man, a synthesizer, and a heartbeat masquerading as a piano riff. He made fear loopable. You could hum it. You could dance to it, if you were the kind of person who taps their foot to dread. And that's the thing. Great horror scores don't just accompany the monster, they become the monster. You don't remember Michael Myers' footsteps. You remember that 5/4 rhythm. You don't remember the shark's teeth. You remember two notes. Dun dun. Modern filmmakers know it too. Silence is the new jump scare. A24 figured it out early. Hereditary, The Witch, Talk to Me. Half the fear is what you don't hear. You lean forward, you wait, and the sound designer somewhere off screen whispering, "Gotcha." Because our brains are wired to fill the quiet. You remove the noise and we invent our own ghosts. And gamers know this on a cellular level. The Resident Evil door opening creak, the universal symbol for "you're about to regret saving." The Silent Hill 2 radio static, Pavlovian dread in audio form, the Dead Space sound design, corridors that hiss like something's breathing right behind you. And then there's that save room music. Every gamer knows the relief. Soft piano, safe light, herb menu, it's the sound of hope with tinnitus. We'd sit there 5 extra minutes just to catch our breath. If you played Fear, you remember the silence between gunfights, like the world was holding its breath. If you played The Last of Us, you remember Gustavo's guitar, single notes trembling like an old floorboard. That's the genius of horror sound. It teaches you when to exhale. You can track entire decades through their horror soundtracks. The 90s gave us Scream 2's rock radio meta energy, I Know What You Did Last Summer's grunge guilt, and the new metal cathedral that was Queen of the Damned. The 2000s doubled down. Resident Evil, Underworld, Saw, every end credit was basically a Hot Topic playlist with murder. And I'm not even mad about it. There's something pure about leaving a theater to the sound of Rob Zombie yelling about demons. You just felt complete. Now, we've traded guitars for ambience. Movies hum instead of howl. Shows like Stranger Things and The Haunting of Hill House use music like memory, nostalgia as echo. Even podcasts like this one, we lean on that same magic. A little vinyl crackle, a distant thunder roll, the sound of a wolf howling, footsteps on a wooden floor. A piano note sustained too long. Instant atmosphere. Fear lives inside the frequency. Sound is the soul of horror. It tells you when to run, when to hide, and when to cry. You can close your eyes, but you can't close your ears. And when the final note fades, when the last scream turns into silence, that's where something else begins. Something older, quieter, and strangely comforting. Because after we've celebrated the monsters, it's time to remember the ones who made us brave enough to face them. Every year, as the jack-o'-lanterns start to sag and the fog machines go quiet, another celebration begins. And it isn't about fear at all. It's about memory. Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead. A tradition born in Mexico and carried all over the world. A time when families build ofrendas, altars of light and love filled with photos, food, and the things that meant something to the people they miss. It's not a funeral, it's an invitation, a welcome home. And this year, we're building one in our house too. Ours has candles, a couple of sugar skulls, and right in the center, a photo of my girl Ripley. Her leash, her red heart tag, and of course a treat. Because if there's a heaven for good dogs, it definitely smells like peanut butter and fresh grass. She's a part of our ofrenda, along with everyone we wish would visit us. Family, friends, the ones who built us and the ones who still guide us. We're going to light a candle, tell a story, maybe even play the songs they loved. Because remembering is its own kind of magic. And honestly, it feels right that the Nerdoween finale lands right here, halfway between the living and the remembered. We've spent the entire month talking about ghosts and monsters, but this is where those stories stop being scary. Because the only thing they can't haunt is our love. So today, wherever you are, if you've got someone you miss, set a light for them. Tell their story. Play their song. Let their spirits know you remember. That's what Dia de los Muertos is all about. Never letting go, but keeping the door open just wide enough for the good memories to walk back through. For Ripley, for everyone we still carry with us, this candle's for you. And that brings us to our final stop for Nerdoween 2025, the community checkpoint, True Ghost Stories. Because after a month of monsters, there's nothing scarier or more comforting than the stories that come from real people. This is where we close the laptops, dim the lights, and hand the mic to you, the listeners. Because the best ghost stories don't come from Hollywood. They come from home. And all month you've been sending in stories. The creepy ones, the comforting ones, the ones you swore you'd never tell out loud. And to kick things off, we've got a collection from friend of the pod, Sarah. 5 short accounts from the haunted house she grew up in, a place her mom still calls home. We'll call this set The House on Hammett Hill. Up first, the man in the cowboy hat. When we moved into that house on Hammett Hill, I was about 3. My mom always heard strange things. Kids giggling when we, the children, were not home. Things falling, stuff disappearing. Me and my sister Katie used to talk about the man in the cowboy hat. He'd stand in the field, sometimes up by the house. Mom never saw him. We stopped talking about him around age 6 or 7. Just stopped. Then, when I was a teenager, I took a mirror selfie on a disposable camera. When it got developed, you could see him, the silhouette of a man, cowboy hat and all. Now that's the part that chills me, the way kids stop mentioning something like they know not to feed it attention. Then years later it shows up again, not in memory, but on film. If that photo's still around, it for sure belongs in an Unsolved Mysteries marathon. Up next, the window test. One time my best friend was over. I told him the house was haunted. He laughed it off, kept cracking jokes in the living room, until the window flew open. And it was one of those spring-loaded windows. You have to actually twist the lock before it moves. And it was locked tight. Then bam! Straight to the top. He believed me after that one. That'll convert a skeptic in a heartbeat. Once a locked window ignores physics, logic takes a coffee break. Up next, the lights in the woods. Later we saw lights in the woods from our driveway. They'd brighten and dim slowly. Not moving, not like flashlights, just floating along. Now that's harmless until you picture it in your own mind. A quiet driveway, night air thick, lights pulsing like they're breathing, nothing moving. That's a real nope moment. And next, the flying book. A book flew at my head once. I might have deserved it. I could have been a brat that day. I don't really know. Listen, ghost or karma, it's hard to say. Sometimes the universe just has impeccable comedic timing. And next, the growl at the window. My sister Katie once heard deep guttural growling outside her window. She was home alone, called me crying. I stayed on the phone as I rushed home. When I got there, no one was outside, but I heard a growl from the fireplace. No idea who or what it was. Now that one lingers, because sound travels different when you're terrified. You don't just hear it, you feel it. Two siblings on the phone, one racing home while the other listens to something breathing through the walls. That's pure haunted house cinema. Sarah, thank you for sharing those. They hit a special nerve, not just because they're creepy, but because they remind us of how personal fear is. Every family's got that one house, that one story, or that one photo no one can explain. Even if we never solve it, we remember it, we carry it. That's what these checkpoints are for, to show how thin the line really is between ghost story and memory. Maybe we tell them not to prove something's out there, but just to remind ourselves we're not the only ones who felt it. So to Sarah, thank you. You help keep this show alive. This next story comes from a friend of the pod who would like to remain anonymous, but we're calling this one The Sleeper. In the 2010s, I was chief of security at a local mall, and we had a ghost. Not the kind that rattled chains or flickered lights, but one that haunted the parking lot. We called him The Sleeper. And the story goes, years earlier, a homeless man had been sleeping in his car and passed away overnight. No one found him until morning. The exact parking spot always changed depending on who was telling the story, but I remember the real one, marked by a dark, distinct oil stain on the pavement. And here's where it gets weird. Anyone who parked in that space would come back out later and swear they saw him. A man asleep in their back seat. Same position, same stillness. We screened hundreds of calls from mall employees claiming they'd seen him. Same story every time. A man, sleeping. And when they opened the door, no one was there. That's the kind of story that gets under your skin because it's so ordinary. No flickering lights, no cold spots, just a quiet reminder that not every spirit wants to scare you. Some of them just stay where they were last comfortable. And there's something heartbreakingly human about that. And of course, now I'll never look at an empty car in a parking lot the same way again. Up next, submitted by friend of the pod, Corey. We'll call this one The Watcher by the Barn. Back in the early 2000s, a buddy and I were doing our usual weekend sleepover thing. Sun's going down, sugar levels are up, and we're bored the way preteen boys get bored, looking for trouble that probably isn't there. Across from my childhood home stood an old hay barn. By day, it was our training ground, our personal ninja warrior course, complete with our own imaginary Mount Midoriyama. We'd climb the rafters, swing from ropes, call it conditioning. Hours later, we decided to head back home. Halfway down the gravel drive, my friend froze. He said, "Hey, I'm getting this weird feeling that we're being watched." He couldn't explain it. Said every hair on his body was standing up, like someone was burning a hole straight through the back of his head with their stare. We both turned around, and that's when we saw it. A shadow, human-shaped, leaning out from behind the barn. Watching. Just watching. Being dumb kids, we did the only logical thing. We started walking toward it. The shadow darted back behind the barn. We waited, creeping closer. When we reached the corner, nothing. No footprints, no sound, just the smell of old hay and dust. We started running home. Halfway there, we turned back one last time, and there it was again, standing where it had been before, Still watching. Now that one hits different, man. Every kid who grew up near woods or farmland knows that exact chill. That instinct that tells you you are not alone, even when you can't prove it. And what gets me isn't that it moved, it's that it came back. It's like the land itself was saying, yeah, I see you. You can leave now. And this last one is coming from friend of the pod, Dina. We'll call it Under the Bed. After my boyfriend passed away, his mom took all of his clothes and kept them in her room. She grieved hard. So hard that she actually passed away herself just 10 months later. After her funeral, I went and gathered all of his clothes and put them back in my own room, under my bed, right where me and him used to sleep, right where he had passed away. That night after work, I came home. The room was dim, not dark, just that kind of heavy gray light that sits still. I reached for the switch and froze. The bed skirt was sticking straight out, and something was under the bed watching me. All I could make out was white hair. It wasn't fast, whatever it was. It crept slowly, almost deliberately, slipping back under the bed. My heart stopped, because my boyfriend's mom had that exact kind of white hair, and I just felt it was her. That she'd followed her grief to where her son had last been. I couldn't leave it, so I got down on my knees, flashlight shaking, and lifted the bed skirt. There was nothing there, just his clothes. And I did end up sleeping there that night, and nothing ever bothered me again. That's the kind of story that hurts and heals in the same breath. There's fear in it for sure, but there's love all through it too. Because sometimes the line between a haunting and a goodbye is so thin, you don't realize which side you're standing on. Maybe she wasn't there to scare you, Dina. Maybe she just came to make sure everything she loved was still together. And that's what I love about doing these episodes. These stories aren't just about ghosts. They're about connection, about grief that lingers because love does too. We started this month chasing monsters, and here we are, closing it by finding the humanity hiding inside the hauntings. And that, everyone, is Nerdoween. 4 weeks, dozens of monsters, hundreds of memories. A whole community of storytellers proving that even in the dark, there's still connection. You know, when I started this month, I thought we were just going to celebrate the fun kind of fear, the movie marathon kind, the leave the hallway light on just in case kind. But somewhere along the way, it became about something else. Every ghost story we heard this month had one thing in common. They weren't really about death. They were about memory, about how the people and pets we love never truly leave us. They linger in the corners, and the stories, and the laughter that sneaks in after the scream. Fear and love. They're made of the same thing. Attention. You don't fear what you don't care about, and you don't keep telling stories about something unless a part of you hopes it still hears you. I'm going to think about that a lot when we set out the ofrenda in our house today, because today marks the beginning of Dia de los Muertos. Candles, marigolds, photos, and right there in the middle, our girl Ripley's heart tag. She's been gone a few months now, but I still catch myself expecting to hear her claws on the floor at night. That little pause at the doorway before she'd come flop down beside me. So this year, her candle stays lit for every good girl, every loyal companion, and everyone we've loved who've made us feel safe in the dark. If love can haunt, then may we all be haunted forever. To everyone who listened, who shared stories with me, who kept Nerdoween alive all month long, thank you. You made this more than a podcast. You made it a campfire that just keeps finding new people to gather around it. So whether you've been here since episode 1 or you just wandered in because you heard whispering in the feed, welcome to the family. You're a part of this now. Next week, the pumpkins go back in the attic, the candy becomes breakfast, and we get ready to talk games, cartoons, nostalgia, the usual Nerdcast chaos. But today, we're going to let the candles burn a little longer. We're going to let the ghosts visit a little closer, because that's what this season's really about. Remembering what mattered, laughing at what scared us, and keeping a light on for the ones who can't make it home. For Ripley, for everyone we miss, for every listener who shared a piece of themselves with me this month, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I'll see you on the other side of the dark. Now let's roll into those shout-outs. Before Nerdoween fades back into the fog for another year, we're going to do this right. So let's hit the shout-outs of Nerdoween one last time. Shout out to my player 2, the final girl to my horror movie, the heartbeat under every jump scare, and the only one patient enough to let me turn our living room into a recording crypt all month long. Shout out to Cap. Could have never have done this without you, brother. And shout out to my brother, holding down the fort while I chase ghosts and deadlines. You're proof that family can survive on sarcasm, controller batteries, and leftover Halloween candy. And Pickle. Look, I don't even know where to start. You're like if a cursed Funko Pop gained sentience and a sweet tooth. Never change, dude. Just maybe stop sending me cryptic memes at 3 a.m. And finally, a special shout out to Ripley. Forever the best girl. Forever guarding the studio door. Probably wondering why I still haven't shared the snacks on the ofrenda. You're still here, Bippy, and you always will be. And finally, to all of you, every single one of you who tuned in, shared your stories, lit your own candles, and kept Nerdoween alive. You're the reason this thing has a heartbeat. You turned a podcast into a family, a spooky little corner of the internet where nostalgia and nightmares coexist. Thank you for being here. Thank you for staying weird, staying curious, and staying gold. So with that, stay gold, nerd bold, and stay spooky. And I'll catch you on the next one.
Game over.